let me say, a word in defense of reason in dialogue with faith.
Because faith is that proof. Faith unites us to that substance.
But reason, in order to realize its full potential, needs the horizons revealed by and truths contained in the faith. And not just any faith, but the Catholic faith.
Let's look at sin. I mean, not directly at sin. Let's look at an abstract account of sin, because I think this is very important. It's overlooked. Nobody talks about sin enough in relationship to this very difficulty. Again, Pope Pius XII asserted that one set of obstacles to proving the existence of God arise from original sin, and more particularly from disordered passions. So it is that men easily persuade themselves in such matters that what they do not wish to believe is false, or at least doubtful. And I believe it's not just an entire culture could desire to have a particular view of nature that would allow them to do what they wanted to do. It didn't just have to be one person. So let's look at a brief survey of the 7 deadly sins. You didn't think you were going to get it? Here it comes at the end. Pride. Can pride itself malform someone's understanding of the possibility of demonstration of God's existence? At 13 years old, Ayn Rand wrote confidently in her diary, "Today I decided to be an atheist." 13. She was an overachiever. She was convinced that the concept of God is degrading to men, that's her quote, because the affirmation that God is perfect means that man can never be perfect. That's it. No God. The fact that God is defined as being more perfect than human beings was enough for her to say, then God can't exist. Well, that's pride. And that decision was made. She was 13. She never went back on it. So that can be the source of somebody actually denying a legitimate demonstration. They'll get out of it any way they can. Envy could be one. Whereas pride is an aristocratic vice, envy is the vice to which democracies are prone, a point made so cogently by Alexis de Tocqueville in his classic Democracy in America. The notion that anybody, that is, we all equally, ought to be able to understand quite easily and without effort a proper demonstration of God's existence is wrong. Okay? The demonstration of God's existence is aristocratic in the way that a demonstration in mathematics, chemistry, or physics is aristocratic, or in philosophy. It takes a lot of effort, knowledge, and ability. In other words, none of the things that we did were like, hey, you put this on a bumper sticker and go cruising down. Everyone behind you will go, God exists. Whew, God exists, It ain't going to work that way. They're very hard to understand. It takes a lot of effort. Okay? So the validity of God's existence or demonstration can't be assessed by an opinion poll. If opinion polls don't get us competent presidents, they won't get us to God. So the notion that somebody else knows more and you have to know more, and I don't want to believe that. I want on my own, right now, without any work, be able to say that's good or bad demonstration. Anger, the sin of anger. The contemporary skeptic Michael Shermer assures us that he, a one-time evangelical, rejected God's existence because the evidence against it provided by science. And by the way, he also rejects the notion that there are persons. So he follows just exactly what we did. He said, it was because I saw the science showed me that God doesn't exist. In his latest book, The Believing Brain, he actually reveals the real root of his rejection of God. In college, a beautiful young woman he was dating was in an accident, and as a consequence, she was paralyzed. Shermer prayed and prayed, but to no effect. Shermer is angry, and he's made a career of disproving God who didn't answer his prayers. That's a real psychological possibility. If you don't think it is, you don't know enough about human nature. Okay, we're not Spock, thank goodness. Sloth. Can we doubt the effect of just plain laziness on demonstration being effective? If understanding a demonstration of God's existence takes so much effort, the slothful would rather not bother, would rather go on what he knows. Well, it doesn't look right to me, and that's what would matter, but without little effort. So it would allow a kind of content with comfy agnosticism or a limp faith, that is, a faith that refuses to wrestle with the deepest issues, but say, "Oh, science can do what they want. I believe in God. I'm just not. I don't need that." We do have to worry about it. Lust. We don't have to go back to the Marquis de Sade for this, although he was an atheist. We have Huxley's quote: But today, if you've read Christopher Hitchens or Richard Dawkins, they both make it very clear, especially Christopher Hitchens, that they don't want the existence of God getting in the way of sexual desire. They're very upfront about that. Okay? That's part of it. That's part of it. The point is that there are many things that would make a person not want God to exist, and so make any demonstration of God's existence to him or her entirely ineffective, even if it was entirely valid. Now, sometimes the sins are obvious, like the ones I just threw out there now. They're obvious. Sometimes they're not, as in this candid assertion by the first-rate philosopher. He's wonderful. The agnostic Thomas Nagel, who writes in his last word, "I want atheism to be true and am made uneasy by the fact that some of the most intelligent and well-informed people I know are religious believers. It isn't just that I don't want to believe in God, it's that I hope there's no God. I don't want there to be a God. I don't want the universe to be like that." That's the telling part. In other words, I want the universe to be in such a way that that won't happen. And I like him because he's that very clear and honest. So notice what this allows us to do to make things more complex. This section on the effect of sin as an obstacle connects to the previous section on the materialist reductionist view of nature as an obstacle. If you don't want God to exist, then you'd be far, far more likely to accept and make culturally imperial and hold on to very tightly a view of nature that makes the existence of God and hence the demonstration of existence impossible. That would just make sense. It's as Nagel said, I don't want the universe to be in such a way that, and that's what I call the Epicurean connection from the ancient Greek philosopher Epicurus, who literally designed the universe in such a way that God couldn't exist. Now, we've covered the most important obstacles to the proof of God's existence, so we can get to the question of proof itself. I said something above that we've got to distinguish, something above about having to distinguish between a philosophic and scientific proof of something. And again, the Catechism affirms that we have demonstrations of the existence of God, but these would be proofs for the existence of God, not in the sense of proofs in the natural sciences, but rather in the sense of converging and convincing arguments which allow us to attain certainty about the truth. Now, this could be very, very easily misunderstood as implying that such philosophical proofs are entirely separate and separable from science and nature. And again, a Catholic cannot take this as allowing a kind of Manichaean or schizophrenic divide with philosophy and metaphysics on the one side and science and physics on the other, and never the twain shall meet. So contrary to this notion, a Catholic must hold that all demonstrations of God's existence take place through his effects. That is, through nature, all of nature. By the way, that doesn't mean that you're proving the existence of God as creator. All it means is much thinner than that. A necessary cause. You're not even defining cause beyond that. And since there's an analogy between causes as we know them and God as a cause, at least some analogy, you can have a valid demonstration without falling into the quagmire of confusing that with defining a creator by demonstration. You don't have to have that problem. Therefore, when the Catechism says that proofs for the existence of God are not proofs in the sense in the natural sciences, it cannot mean that these proofs have nothing at all to do with science and are entirely abstracted from nature. What would be the demonstration from his effects then? It would have no connection. It can only mean that the philosophic demonstration takes into account the best and most important discoveries in all of the sciences as necessary parts of its demonstration, even while rising above the constricted methods of demonstration any one of the sciences, and here's where the fists are going to fly, and correcting their materialist reductionist assumptions. That has to occur. Okay, if you don't do that, then you're taking into account a view of science which could well be defined to destroy any demonstration of the existence of God. So you have to correct for those things. So, all I'm saying there is that metaphysics, or first philosophy, has to be based on physics, that is, in the grand sense of knowledge of nature. So to go back to our original question, can science demonstrate the existence of God? The answer is no and yes. That way, I get out either way. And I'm not being schizophrenic. Don't listen to him. Just kidding. Any particular science. Now, can science demonstrate, never mind. Can science demonstrate the existence of God? The answer is no and yes. Any particular science within its own restricted methods and hence mode of proof will not prove the existence of God. A chemist, as chemists, won't come up with an experiment that demonstrates the existence of God in the same way that, say, Lavoisier designed an experiment to show that dephlogisticated air was really oxygen. And you phlogiston people, I know, I'm sorry I had to put that out there. It doesn't exist. Rather, any legitimate philosophical demonstration must take account of the latest discoveries in the various sciences because these necessarily contribute to our deeper understanding of nature. That is, the realm of God's effects from which the existence of God must be demonstrated. Otherwise, you have to have some kind of rarefied metaphysics that isn't based on any kind of physics. That doesn't mean you don't correct for them, though. So it won't do to allow certain sciences, and this is, Dr. Keebler can throw darts at me. It won't do, by the way, to allow certain sciences to show design but declare others off limits. That is, you can't affirm fine-tuning with astronomy and in physics, but deny that, or declare biology and in particular evolution off limits as not showing design. If God's existence can be proved through nature, then evolution itself, properly understood, would offer the most startling, convincing, astounding proofs of the existence of God. Far more compelling because it deals with things right in front of us. So how's that for a fight starter? Okay, so in other words, you can't leave it off limits. You can't let what I would call pure Darwinism, but I distinguish between Darwinism and evolution. That's another long story. We don't have time for that. So I'd like to end by offering several promising proofs of the existence of God, including the Crosby proof, which I've named after him after he slipped me a $5. The first proof is an historical philosophical proof. These are very quick. One that plays directly in what we've covered above, but it's going to be controversial given what other people have said. In the 19th century, a view of nature, that's why I call this historical philosophical proof. In the 19th century, a view of nature dominated that made the demonstration of the existence of God impossible. The fundamentals of that view of nature were themselves not demonstrated but assumed. How they came to be assumed is a long story, which I won't take up now. The fundamentals of this view were the assumption, number one, that the universe is eternal, two, that there are only two substances, homogeneous matter and space, and three, that both matter and space are eternal, as are the laws of nature that govern the motion of matter. Those were the assumptions. Note why demonstrating the existence of God was impossible given these assumptions. Because matter and the universe were assumed to be eternal, they had no need of a cause. Notice I didn't have to say creator. Because matter and the universe were assumed to be eternal, they had no need of a cause. Because the laws of nature were eternal, they needed no explanation in terms of some intelligent being, but simply provided the source of order defining material reality. To put it in context of other people's argument, they took the place of form. So mathematical form took the place of form in the sense of Aristotle. Now, there's no doubt from the historian's perspective that this dominant view helped accelerate the progress of secularism. That is, the belief that God doesn't exist and science shows that God doesn't exist. Science demonstrates that God doesn't exist. And that religion will be replaced by science. So now we're going to the sort of the sociological historical level. That's the effect it had. And so we have no need of a creator. In the 20th century, much to the surprise of many scientists, science itself revealed that the universe had a definite beginning and that the universe is therefore contingent. That's the important part. Matter is contingent, and the laws of nature are contingent. That is, they aren't necessary, they aren't eternal. And even stranger that the parameters, laws, and matter itself were and are finely tuned. These advances in our knowledge of nature came about through a variety of very technical experiments, none of which by themselves demonstrated the existence of God. Notice this satisfies the catechism saying that they're not as such scientific demonstrations. None of which by themselves demonstrated the existence of God, but all of which, taken together and distilled by philosophers, provide converging and convincing arguments that demonstrate ever more completely that an intelligent, non-material being, not confined by time or space, exists as a necessary cause, being very careful, of the universe as we know it. Second proof, and I can actually get this done in time. They get quick as we go. This is in honor of the esteemed Dr. Crosby, but actually I'm just simply taking The Privileged Planet, which I still think is probably the most important book out there to read now. So important that I wrote a book shamelessly ripping off the central arguments called A Meaningful World. I didn't exactly rip them off, I got their permission. But the point of it is that it allows us to make a new kind of argument. And it combines, unifies three streams. First, the deep anthropic argument in astronomy and physics as extended through chemistry and biology. By that I mean that you can know the chemical elements are biocentric before there is ever biology. And you can ratchet that up to know they're anthropic as well. That is, they're particularly finely tuned for human life and intelligent human life. So I'm actually have more at stake. They were very humble, and I don't know any better. So they were very humble in their assertion, but that's the implications of it. That's where you go. It is heady stuff. It's a way to get my head chopped off. Number two, the catechism on creation would be part of the stream. Three, personalism and philosophy. This is more concerned with establishing the proper grounds of science and the mode of advancing science, and hence all proofs of God's existence that depend on our understanding of nature. It's trying to reorganize and understand our view of nature. It's summed up, at least by intimation in the Catechism. This is one of the most important things in the Catechism. Paragraph 364. Man, though made of body and soul, is a unity. Through his very bodily condition, he sums up in himself the elements of the material world. Through him they are thus brought to their highest perfection and can raise their voice in praise freely given to the Creator. Notice this is a non-Cartesian, non-Manichaean, non-Gnostic type argument. It says that literally creation finds its culmination in creatures that have free will, speech, reason, and can know God. And it says elements. It doesn't say metaphysical assumptions. It says elements. The argument depends on reversing the entire flow of reductionist materialism. Stop seeing things that are above only in terms of what can be said about them if you assume that on the lowest level that was the only defining reality. Now it's saying the reverse. I'm going to understand things anthropically from the human being on down as well. By that what I mean is, for example, it would take for granted that our material nature allows us to have free will. And there's a potentiality, I can use that now because now you understand, there's a potentiality in matter for a speech-making, knowing being of just pretty much the kind that we are. And I wasn't the first one to make this argument. It's Michael Denton made it, and he made it incredibly well. So this is a reversal of things. What it does is it affirms things that you know to be true that cannot be denied by science, or there's something wrong with your view of science, reason, and nature. If you know you are choosing and you know you are a material being, you got to have a view of nature that allows that to happen. Okay? So it's not Manichaean. It's not saying my brain has nothing to do with my thoughts. It's saying something even weirder. The fact that I have a brain in all its complexity is something that all the lower levels allow, and indeed can be brought to the point where I exist as a being really between immaterial reality and material reality. And the sign is I'm bringing it all up to that peak and going a little beyond. Okay, so it's a hardcore, it's so medieval. It's a hardcore new argument based on the kind of argument that we would have found in Privileged, well, we do find it because it's not expired yet, Privileged Planet. Okay, a third kind of proof. This one's obviously connected to the second, but I think it stands in its own right. It's the nip it in the bud proof. It's kind of defensive proof, but it strikes directly at a common materialist claim that science demonstrates that God can't exist. Simply turn it around and say, if you cannot demonstrate that you exist, then I don't care about your demonstration. because you don't exist. You can't give me a proof. Fourth proof. This is one of the extraordinary promising proof. It comes from Pope Benedict in his Regensburg address. And again, we shamelessly stole it with his permission, palling around as usual, out at the castle. So I incorporated it into a meaningful world. It's the proof from Intelligibility. And of course, I stole that from the notion that the very good argument that occurs in Privileged Planet about the way that the intelligibility is related to the actual order. And the argument is, to boil it down, something like this. Science reveals that nature is deeply intelligible. Even more strange, the deep, multi-layered, complex order of nature is intelligible to us. That is, the natural order is knowable to precisely those creatures who are a union of sense and intellect. As a lot of the argument in Meaningful World points to the fact that the world, the universe on multiple layers is strangely knowable by creatures that use sense to know. Okay, that I call it a tutorial view. That deep intelligibility of nature is therefore rightly called anthropic. The surprising nature of this intelligibility to human beings as knowers is shown most vividly in the strange effectiveness of mathematics. We had our mathematics guy that wanted his due, and I'm putting it right here. Because mathematics is a fundamentally abstract human construct, the effective formulations of mathematics preceded by centuries their surprising application in physics. Okay? And the order of nature which allowed them to be so wonderfully effective existed prior to human beings. So you can't say any of them are caused by natural selection. Okay, the intelligibility is there prior to there ever being the thing they're intelligible to, or prior to the creatures that have the ability to make the abstract mathematics, the constructions of which precede their application by centuries. Okay, so the intelligibility is there. Well, there can't be intelligibility without intelligent cause. That is, randomness could cause one layer of intelligibility, maybe accidentally on the surface. But if you kept finding it down and down and down and down, and they were all connected to each other, like a Shakespeare play, you would say that randomness couldn't be the cause. It would be the right inference, but this isn't the normal kind of ID inference. It's another kind. It's what the Pope talked about, and to bring it to its finale, Pope Benedict said, science depends on this intelligibility. Science depends on this intelligibility, and he's right. If it weren't deeply intelligible, scientists couldn't function. Okay? So the activity of science itself shows that there must be an intelligent cause of nature. So now we come back to the original question, can science demonstrate the existence of God? Well, science depends on both the inherent intelligibility of nature and the human capacity that is supremely fit to understand it. Random causes could not produce either one, let alone both, nor could an inadequate view of nature. Notice I don't have to talk about randomness all the time. Randomness is highly overvalued. Okay? You simply have a bad view of nature. So materialism can't produce that. Therefore, science proves the existence of an intelligent being as the cause of both the order of nature and the capacities of human nature. It is therefore possible to prove the existence of God through the existence of science. Little twist. Okay? It's possible to prove the existence of God through the existence of science. There you go.